Hello, Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, I know you are not supposed to watch any videos about your religion not authorized by your governing body. But I am someone who has questions and concerns about a particular Watchtower article. And if you knocked on my door to preach to me today, I would produce this same article and ask you the same questions that are in this video. So please hear me out, and if you are able to address any of my concerns, I will be very pleased to hear back from you. The article in question is entitled Walking in the Path of Increasing Light, and it's in the February 15, 2006 Watchtower. I consider this to be one of, if not the most important articles the Watchtower Society has ever published, because on and in between its lines, it gives us all the information, all the evidence that anyone would need to determine the truthfulness of the governing body's claim that they are what the Bible calls God's faithful and discreet slave, the earthly intermediary between a perfect God and his chosen people. The article tells us that for approximately the last 100 years, Jehovah God has been providing the governing body and their predecessors with increasing light in order to refine his people organizationally, doctrinally, and morally. And the article goes through these instances of light and explains Jehovah's reasons for providing it. But what makes no sense to me at all, what hopefully you can explain to me, is the timing of this light. And I have three brief examples for you. The first one, the article tells us that in 1973, Jehovah God provided increasing light on the subject of smoking tobacco. It was called a defilement of flesh. And from that moment on, smoking was banned for all Jehovah's Witnesses. But if smoking was a defilement of the flesh in 1973, wasn't it just as much a defilement in 1873, during the time of Charles Russell, the Jehovah's Witness founder? If Jehovah God saw that his people were defiling their bodies back then, why didn't he provide this light back then? If you had information that you knew would save lives and alleviate suffering from lung cancer and other horrible diseases, how would you describe the morality of sitting on that information and doing nothing with it for 100 years? Wouldn't that be an immorality? How can the deliberate delay in the provision of enlightenment, re-smoking, be described as moral refinement? That's the first of my concerns with this article. My second concern is with the increasing light on blood transfusions that this article tells us was revealed in the July 1st, 1945 Watchtower. From that date, blood transfusions were effectively banned for all Jehovah's Witnesses, including their children. But I did some research into the history of blood transfusions, and I discovered that after a century or more of trial and error and advances in medical science, the procedure began to actually save lives in the early 1900s, certainly during the First World War. In 1921, the first blood donor clinic was established in London, England, and very soon after that, in many countries, blood transfusions had become standard medical practice. But if what this article and the July 1st, 1945 Watchtower tell us is true, that this is a vital matter to Jehovah God, then why didn't he provide this light in the early 1900s or at any time before that, so that none of his people, even unwittingly, ever committed the sin of having a blood transfusion. In Jehovah God's eyes, why was it apparently perfectly okay to have a blood transfusion at any time up to June 30th, 1945, but not the next day? The timing of this light makes no sense to me at all. Before I give you my third concern with this article, let me ask you something. What is the one word in Jehovah's Witness doctrine that occupies your thoughts every single day? Armageddon, am I right? That glorious day when Jehovah God is going to wipe out all the wickedness in this world, and then death will be no more, and the 1,000-year restoration of the earth back to its original Garden of Eden state will begin. No wonder you look forward to this so eagerly. So, in this Walking in the Path of Increasing Light article, how many times would you guess the word Armageddon appears? I'll tell you, it's 0. Not one single mention. But why is this? Does this mean Jehovah's Witnesses have always been correct in their pronouncements about Armageddon? Does this mean that they have never needed any increasing light, any refinement on this subject? Well, let's look at the evidence. In his 1889 book, The Time Is at Hand, Charles Russell predicted that Armageddon would arrive in the year 1914. In 1920, Russell's successor, Joseph Rutherford, published his book, Millions Now Living Will Never Die, in which he predicted 1925 as the date for Armageddon. During most of the second half of the 20th century, all Jehovah's Witnesses proclaimed that Armageddon would arrive before the generation that witnessed the year 1914 passes away. The May 1st, 1992 Watchtower even calls this prophecy a promise by Jesus. And look at the front cover of this May 15, 1984 Watchtower. How could a perfect and loving God who wants his people to be doctrinally refined, how could he watch them make all these errors and do nothing about it? I've asked many Jehovah's Witnesses these questions. One of them said to me, well, maybe at that time Jehovah was busy doing other things that were more important to him. So I had another look at this article, and it's true. During the 20th century, Jehovah God did provide increasing light on several other subjects. For instance, in 1932, he noticed that congregation officials, people like elders, were being elected by their congregations. But Jehovah God didn't want that. No, he wanted them to be appointed by the religion's leaders in New York. So he provided increasing light to get those elections stopped. And then in 1938, he noticed some officials were still being elected. So he provided even more increasing light to get those elections stopped completely. So please correct me if I'm wrong here. Reading on and in between the lines, in a 6-year period in the 1930s, Jehovah God provided increasing light twice on one organizational/administrative issue, while at the exact same time he watched his people defiling their bodies, smoking cigarettes, having blood transfusions, a vital matter, don't forget, and preaching either no or false information re the timing of Armageddon. But on all those issues, he did nothing. Am I the only one to sense something very wrong here? Re the timing of Armageddon, Jehovah God did eventually, apparently, provide the governing body with some light, as relayed to us in the April 15, 2010 Watchtower, which tells us that Armageddon is coming before the generation that overlaps the generation that witnessed the year 1914 passes away. This overlapping generation is not excessively long, and it has an end. So, here we are, 2019, 105 years after 1914. How much longer does this not excessively long overlapping generation have left to live? I would say, more to the point and much more interesting, is when this not excessively long 1914 overlapping generation passes away, with still no sign of Armageddon, of course, what will the governing body do? They can't do nothing. They can't just pretend they never made this prophecy. They'd never get away with that. They can't blame Jehovah because he's perfect. He never makes mistakes. And this time they can't blame you, ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses, like they did in November 1995, when the previous Armageddon prophecy was formally abandoned. On that occasion, the governing body said, in effect, that if after reading headlines like this, you felt disappointed, let down, because the 1914 generation did pass away, well, that was your fault. Yes, you were guilty of speculation. I'm not kidding you. They actually did use that word. Look it up, November 1st, 1995 Watchtower. Now, according to the governing body, this latest current Armageddon prophecy is increased light. It is information that originated with Jehovah God and was provided to the governing body. So the minute that the governing body are forced to acknowledge that the 1914 overlapping generation has passed away, the only thing they can do is admit that they, and they alone, are responsible for inventing and promoting this completely false prophecy. I wouldn't mind betting that right now, today, they are already rehearsing their response to this impending doctrinal disaster. We, the governing body, we never claimed infallibility. We are imperfect men, and even though we had the best of intentions, somehow we must have misinterpreted Jehovah's overlapping generation light. Yeah, right. I'm sure they'll be hoping that such an apparent act of contrition will get them off the hook. But in my opinion, all that will do is impale them on an even bigger hook. Because if they admit to getting just one instance of increasing light wrong, how can we know they haven't done this before? How can we know they haven't got all previous increasing light wrong? Imagine you're the parent of a very sick child who needs a blood transfusion to survive. Imagine the governing body saying to you, well, yes, we did get the overlapping generation light wrong, but we're sure we got the no blood transfusion light right. In making a life or death decision about a blood transfusion for your child, would that kind of response be good enough for you? Jehovah's Witnesses, I know at heart you are good people. And I know how much you want to believe that your governing body speaks the truth. But the truth is not the truth just because someone says it's the truth or because it's something that makes you feel good inside. The truth can only be established by examining evidence and having the courage to accept the results of that examination, no matter how uncomfortable that makes you feel. And if you say to me, oh, no, I have the one true religion, I don't need to examine evidence, then how does that make you any different from many of the religious people you talk to on the doors? When you read on and in between the lines of this article, the evidence is overwhelming. If there really is a perfect and loving Creator God who has a chosen people here on earth, the one thing we can be completely sure of is that that God is not providing any kind of light to the Jehovah's Witness governing body. Those self-appointed leaders of your religion are at best delusional, and at worst, they are absolute charlatans, making it all up as they go along. When those fallible and imperfect men demand unquestioning obedience from you, particularly on issues like blood transfusions, it's not only a gross insult to your intelligence, it demonstrates on their part a callous dismissal of the sanctity and preciousness of life itself. Please read this article, examine the evidence, and then do the right thing.